going on, he grabs his friend and whisks him away on his motorcycle. The snoring gets farther and farther away until we don't hear it at all anymore. And our hero arrives at last to freedom. That's the story. Now, let's hear how this music sounds all put together. And remember to keep this story in your mind. Here goes. Here comes Superman. He hears the whistle. There goes the snoring. The kazoo. And now here comes Superman. Pop! He grabs his friend. And they're off. Snoring gets softer. They're free! Now, all that makes good sense, doesn't it? Makes perfectly good sense. But that's not the real story at all. What this piece really is part of a much longer piece by Richard Strauss called Don Quixote. And in it, Strauss was trying to tell a whole other story, which goes something like this. Don Quixote is the name of a silly old man back in the days of knights in armor and horseback. A foolish old man who read too many books about knighthood and chivalry and conquering armies for his beautiful lady and all that sort of nonsense, and who finally decided he was a marvelous knight himself. So off he goes on his skinny, bony old horse to conquer the world. And he has with him a companion named Sancho Panza, a little fat, jolly fellow who is very faithful to his master, but who was also sensible enough to know that his master's a little cuckoo. So we hear him laughing at old Don Quixote. Suddenly, Don Quixote spies a flock of sheep in the middle of a field going ba, ba, ba. That's all that stuff you heard before, which we thought was snoring. And with them is a shepherd keeping the sheep and playing on his pipe the way all shepherds do. Not a kazoo, but a shepherd's pipe. And Don Quixote, in his mixed-up mind, thinks that the sheep are an army specially put there for him to conquer. So in he charges with his sword flashing. And the sheep run off in all directions, baaing wildly. And he's convinced he has done a truly knightly deed. And is he proud? Now, let's listen to it all over again with the real story in mind and see how it sounds. Sheep, you understand. Now, was that music any different from what we played before? Was it? Is it more exciting, or more fun, or better music? No. Does it have any different musical meaning? No. It's exactly the same, only the story is different. And in fact, there are 100 other stories I could have made up out of my head for the same piece of music. But the music would still have been just as good or just as bad as it is without any story at all. Now do you see what I mean? Well, if you don't, then I'm going to have to try again. I'll take another little bit of this Don Quixote piece of Strauss. Later in that same piece, there's another part about another adventure the old fellow has when he and his friend Sancho Panza take a wild ride through the air on a wooden horse. It goes like this. Now, in this part, there's even a wind machine in the percussion section to give you the effect of wind whistling by as they whoosh up and down through the clouds. Now, why couldn't this music be describing the flight of a jet plane? Or a satellite whistling around in its orbit? Or maybe some old giant snoring like the prisoners in the jail, going... Could be. Well, now let's make believe it is about some old giant snoring and see how the music fits. Isn't that exciting music? No matter what it's about, it's still exciting. Because the music is exciting and for no other reason. Now, that's enough talk about music that tells stories. Let's take a big step now toward finding out the answer to our first question, what does music mean? By listening to some music that doesn't try to tell a story, but only tries to paint a picture in a general sort of way. Or to describe an atmosphere, the look of something, the feel of something, like a night in the woods or an old haunted house or a sunrise. Now we're getting closer to real musical meaning because we don't have a story to worry about while we're listening. You see, all we have to think about is the general idea, and that's easier, so we can concentrate more on the music and enjoy it more. Now, for instance, take Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. Here's a wonderful piece full of charming tunes and marvelous rhythms, driving, peaceful, happy, all kinds of things. But in Beethoven's mind, this symphony was somehow tied up with the idea of the countryside. Farmers, brooks, shepherds, birds. And so he called it the Pastoral Symphony. As you know, pastoral means anything to do with the country. At the beginning of the first movement, he wrote the words, "Awakening of cheerful feelings on arriving in the country." And the music goes like this. Sounds happy, cheerful, pretty, all right. But these feelings, after all, could be happy for any other reason, too. Supposing Beethoven had written the words, "Happy feelings because my uncle left me $1 million," or "Happy feelings because my bellyache went away." He could still have written this happy music, and it would have been just as good and just as happy. Well, now let's try something. Let's change the title of this piece and call it Happy Feelings Because My Bellyache Went Away, let's say. And let's listen to it with that in mind and see if it sounds any different. Still the same happy music, whether it's about your bellyache or a trip to the country. Now, the second movement, Beethoven calls By the Brook. And in this movement, he is trying to describe or imitate or suggest the motion of water in the brook. But supposing we call this asleep in a hammock, and that this motion we're describing gently rocking back and forth in a hammock instead of the water. Let's see how the music would sound then. See, it doesn't change a thing, does it? Whether it's about water or swinging in a hammock, it's the same lovely music. Now, one of the best pieces that paint pictures is by a Russian composer called Mussorgsky. And he wrote a piece named Pictures at an Exhibition. What Mussorgsky did was to take a lot of pictures hanging on a wall in a museum